Welcome back to another episode of Revenue Optimization Radio, hosted by Patrick Morrissey, Chief Marketing Officer at Altify. Revenue Optimization Radio is brought to you by Altify, the sales transformation company, where we believe the only way to unlock sustained growth is to deliver predictable revenue. Delivering insights, thought leadership, and the best practice on how to improve sales velocity. From the one man, maybe the only man who knows how to do all of that, at least this morning, Patrick Morrissey. Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Paul. Good morning. How are you?
Okay. Today is a topic that I find most intriguing. Women in revenue. You know, I had to read that twice. There don't seem to be a lot of women in the revenue generation field here. Is that still the last old guys club here, or is it breaking down?
It's definitely breaking down, and anyone who thinks it's not breaking down is going to be on the wrong side of a sales or a revenue conversation, because they will have gotten outsold by a woman. And I'm excited to dig into this topic because I think, to your point, it's something that doesn't maybe get as much attention as it deserves. Everybody's trying to figure out, how do I optimize revenue? How do I drive more value for customers? And they spend a lot of money on tools and technology when what they maybe should be focusing on is hiring more women. That's really, I think, one of the insights here. And I'm pleased to welcome Tracy Eiler into the conversation. And Tracy is one of the foremost thought leaders on this topic. And when I say topic, I'm not just talking about, women in revenue. I'm talking about what does good look like and great look like in B2B sales and revenue generation. She's one of the top 35 women in B2B sales. She's a CMO and executive at Inside View. She is also a board member and one of the founders of Women in Revenue. Tracy, good morning.
Good morning, Pat, and thanks for the invitation.
I'm excited to get some background on you and get your perspective on this, because the topic of women in revenue seems to Paul's point, be something that seems to be a little bit overlooked. But we've recently done some research at Altify and just published our customer revenue optimization benchmark. And one of the ahas out of the findings there was that, all else being equal, you can generate a 10% increase in win rate if the salesperson is a woman. And It was a little bit astonishing to a lot of people the first time they get their eyes on that, but I don't think that's probably a surprise to you. Give me a little bit of your background and what was the genesis of really Women in Revenue as an organization?
You may not know this about me, Pat, despite the fact that we've worked together a couple of times. My first job when I was 16 years old is I was a sales development rep at a software company. We all had the generic name Chris Kelly because we were all high school kids, and Chris never went away to college or got sick. So there was always like this rotating group of Chris's. And in that experience, I really got the bug for sales and marketing and talking to prospects and seeing how sales organizations worked and so on. And then went into marketing because I definitely do not have the fire in me for the rejection of sales, but I love helping make sales successful. So that's kind of been my mantra, is help make sales easier. The Women in Revenue group came together last fall, where there was a group, kind of a loosely networked group of sales and marketing executive females that came together because we all saw this gap. We saw that our sisters in STEM jobs, in math and engineering and science, were starting to have special programs, even starting out, in childhood, girls who code and things like that. But for women that are interested in jobs where they're driving revenue, marketing roles, sales roles, there just kind of wasn't anything. There were just loose networks. And so a woman named Sherry Johnston had the brainchild of, let's put together this group called Women in Revenue. She got the all precious URL, womeninrevenue.org. The board came together with the mission of advancing the careers of women in revenue positions. And so we're doing that in two ways, by providing networking opportunities and by providing mentorship. And one of the first things we did, of course, as you would, is figure out what's going on in the market. So we did a survey that we just released, and I think your listeners will have access to the ebook that we just put out, which was our own findings plus a lot of third-party research. I'm dying to see yours. I downloaded it but haven't read it yet, because that would be a great stat to add to the mix. There's been a lot of studies about this subject from McKinsey and Harvard and Bloomberg and others that I think really needs to be amplified in the market.
I read the ebook, and there's a mountain of great information that's also very, very well sourced here. Give me the headlines and the 50,000-foot view for everybody that really sets the baseline in terms of current state of play of women in revenue and what's important.
First, we need to start with why companies should even care in the first place, right? Other than it's the right thing to do. Bloomberg Bloomberg came up with a study that I thought was absolutely fascinating, where they called it their Gender Equity Index. And they basically tracked high-performing stocks and saw if there was any difference between the gender mix in those companies. And not surprisingly, there was a big difference. The highest-performing companies had the best gender mix. They also had programs that attracted working parents, as an example. They also had mentorship programs, flexible healthcare, things of that nature. But the highest-performing stocks were really the ones that did the best. And so that makes you think, okay, wait a second here. This is something companies should really pay attention to. In addition to it being the right thing to do, it's financially responsible. And so then what we found out was from McKinsey and others that women actually make phenomenal revenue leaders. At the top of this hour, you were saying your own research said you get 10% better growth or something if a woman is at the helm. Was that how you said it? I can't remember the exact stat.
Yeah, that women, our research uncovered that if you're looking to optimize and improve revenue performance, if you strip out other factors, there's a 10% difference in win rate if the seller and salesperson is a woman versus a man.
Got it. It's a win rate thing. Okay, so what CEB found, which is now part of Gartner, that's the old corporate executive board, what they found was that women in general had overall better effectiveness as sales leaders and marketing leaders by like a 10-point spread, which is pretty interesting. And the top attributes of those leading women were measured, and those included things that were a little counterintuitive, and I'll explain what I mean. You would expect that female sales leaders, for instance, would be great at relationship building. You'd expect them to be great at inspiring and motivating other people, developing their teams, having high integrity and honesty, making sure that people were working on self-development. You'd expect all those things to be true just based on what we know about women's tendency to be nurturing in the way they present to the world. But what they also found was that women ranked higher on driving for results and taking initiative, which was kind of shocking, honestly. When you looked at it, you think, wait a second, that would be what you'd think men would be great at, driver, and then the women would be like more the account managers, right, nurturing and growing a book of business. Not so. And my hypothesis there, I don't have an answer as to why exactly that is, but I think that women in the workplace, especially in high-growing companies where they've got a big revenue number, they're pushing for results and they know how to get them. And they maybe the fact that women tend to have very good nurturing skills allows them to push their teams with a velvet glove, if you know what I mean, steel hand velvet glove. That's possible. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'd be interested in what your listeners think. Those were some of the attributes that we found, in our own research. And it's interesting to ask women what it is that they need to be successful. And there's a whole body of research about that as well.
That's interesting, the counterintuitive nature of that. And it made me think, too, or my observation in that dialogue, for what it's worth, is I find that more often than not, in part because of the social norm, that women have more responsibility for, kids in the household and men do, by and large, if I was to be overly general about it. And the reality is women just don't have time to waste, because there's no way to manage the house or, the kids or school or schedules or everything else and spend a lot of time talking to somebody who's not going to buy from you. And women consistently, not only do they have some of the softer skills, but they are results oriented because they don't have time to mess around.
Yeah, I think that's very true. In fact, there's a joke among some other single mom friends of mine that basically say, if you really want to get something done, give it to a single mom, because they'll just be ruthless with their time. And I think that that's increasingly the case. I do think things are changing quite a bit also in families where both spouses, and in my case currently now, my husband is a VP of sales, I am taking on more responsibility in the home, but he's doing other things, right? So it's a wee bit more balanced, but it definitely is true that I have the lion's share of the responsibility of just making sure that like the college tours are booked and the appointments for the doctor are made and all of that kind of thing. And then that makes me really ruthless with my time management, because it's the only thing that we can control is our time, honestly, right?
100%, and that's the most valuable asset. And kind of double clicking on that topic for a second, what do you find, either in context of the research or the networking with women in revenue, or just your own observation, that are some of the misconceptions about women as sales leaders?
I think that what I hear, so I'll tell you what I hear from my sisters first. I hear that women in sales, individual contributor sales roles, feel like it's a great career to make a lot of money, which is true, right? So if you are really trying to take off in your career, being a female seller allows you to differentiate yourself. There aren't that many of us, and so on. But when it comes to making it into leadership, there really is kind of a boys' club. And, we work in tech, but I know it's true in other markets as well, where often to be a female executive in general, you are the one executive on the E-staff, or maybe the number two, the second executive on the E-staff. And usually the first one is the VP of talent, not to generalize, but usually that's true, the HR person. Yep. And then, if you're the second woman, it's just harder. You just don't think of it as a way to make it happen. I also think what is blocking women from sales leadership roles is when you just think about the natural course of your career. And if you are a female who wants to have family, a quarterly cadence and having a young baby doesn't really make sense, right? It's very, very hard to juggle. It's hard enough to juggle when you have a, quote, regular job like mine, where you can take a 3-month mat leave and your team will back you up. But if you're going to step out for a whole quarter or more, to have a newborn and all of that, it becomes even more complicated, which is why companies, if they want to attract and retain us, need to really be able to adapt with, flex work hours, maybe even some job sharing. I'm not saying that a CRO can job share, right? That's a sort of different story. But if you're a mid-level sales manager, maybe there is a way that the team can come around and accommodate your absence to have your child and then come back after your maternity leave, that kind of thing. So companies need to get smart about that. Salesforce is doing a lot of that kind of thing, but even they are faced with the same challenges that you might expect.
Well, 100%, because and particularly in the subscription world we live in, you have to be always on, and every week and every month and every quarter matter. There's a little bit of conflict there. And I guess I'm interested from your perspective from a leadership perspective, as well as thinking more broadly, is if companies are, it seems like there ought to be a higher priority in trying to source more female candidates and more female leaders. What's it take to make that happen? And what should a company and then an executive team be strategizing to make their organization, regardless of the category you're in, really compelling as a place to work for women?
In our survey, what women said that mattered the most to them were 3 things. They were really concerned about work-life balance, which meant flexible work hours, option to work from home once in a while. That was really key. The second one was mentorship programs, pairing them up with a buddy that was like them. And by the way, the mentor doesn't have to be another female. The mentor can be somebody like you, Pat, right? We need our brothers as allies in this whole thing as well. And then the third thing was an equal seat at the table, which to the women we surveyed said that they wanted influence over the resource allocation that would be part of their remit, part of their job responsibilities. And they wanted to know that that would be the case. And so when they were looking at new opportunities and new companies, the women in our survey and in other material I looked at kind of had 4 buckets. There was the representation bucket, like, do I see women on the board? Do I see women on the leadership page on the website? But more importantly, is the company forthcoming about their gender mix? So for example, at my company, Inside View, 50% of our director level and above positions are filled by women. 40% of our STEM jobs are female. And I think what the last time I counted, I can't do this percentage in my head, but at our regional sales kickoff meeting that we did in Austin in January, there were 55 people in the room and 29 were female. And I always do a gender count. It's just sort of a reflex from when I was the only one for a long time. And I think that it's important for companies to be very open about what their gender mix is at different levels in the company, more than you can just see on a website, and then what they're trying to do to attract more women. Now, what attracts women, besides representation, is they want to know there's equal pay. And we've all seen the stories about how women and men are paid differently. And in our own ebook, we show that in sales and in marketing, there is a pay gap. And it's a little ridiculous, I think, on the sales side especially, where it's black and white, right? You make your quota or you don't. So why would women be paid less if you have the same quota? It doesn't make any sense. The third item was healthcare. So, women really care about their own healthcare and the healthcare of their families. I'm not saying men don't also, but women have a keen eye to that, especially I think if they have children. And to your point, typically women are managing kind of the healthcare of the family and making sure everyone's getting into their appointments. And so they're really paying attention to that. And then the last one was really job satisfaction with things like having options for wellness and flexibility and things of that nature. It's more holistic, I think, than we might have thought it would be.
Absolutely. And I want to come back to a couple of those comments here in a second, but let's pause to pay the bills and then we'll pick the conversation back up.
You're only as successful as your customers, and that demands the need for an exceptional sales execution, revenue retention, and customer success. The challenge for most sales leaders and their teams, however, is that their sales process just doesn't match how their customers buy. Sustained growth isn't possible because the revenue team isn't aligned with customers and prospects. With Altify's sales transformation solutions, companies can deliver predictable revenue growth. Yes, we said predictable revenue growth. They can also acquire and retain customers, and they can collaborate across the revenue team to qualify and win new business while delivering value that unlocks cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Built natively on the Salesforce platform, Altify helps salespeople, managers, and executives achieve sustained revenue growth. They help accelerate sales performance for Autodesk, Comcast, GE, Honeywell, Salesforce, Tableau, and United Healthcare. They can do the same for you. Visit Altify.com, just like it sounds, Altify, Altify.com. And with that, let's head back to Patrick and his guest.
Thanks, Paul. We're talking today with Tracy Eiler, who is on the board of Women in Revenue. And Tracy was just sharing some of the insights from the research and the feedback about what's important in attracting and retaining women. And you talked about, representation and companies being able to be public about what's the gender mix in leadership roles in the company, not just the top of the company who's on the website, but also director and above leadership positions. You were talking about pay and healthcare and job satisfaction. And what it leads me to, Tracy, is that if I flip this around, you were mentioning mentors a second ago. What's the question, or what should women be on the lookout for as they're evaluating, revenue opportunities and they're being recruited by a company?
Let's talk about that mentor, and then in particular how mentors compare to sponsors, Pat, because I think that would be really interesting. The
Yep.
women's sales leaders in particular that I know all talk about the fact that they had a mentor. My dad used to call it having a rabbi, not to get religious on it, but somebody who's looking out for you. And in the women sales leaders I know, 99% of the time, those were men that helped them, that saw their talent, that groomed them, that showed them the way, that did all the things that a great mentor is going to do for you. And so I think when women are interviewing for roles, they need to really talk to the company about, okay, what's your support system here? How do your VPs of sales all work together? How do we collaborate with the heads of engineering and marketing? Is there alignment between those teams and so on? And who's going to help teach me to get better? So maybe I'm interviewing for Western Regional Vice President of the United States to run sales for a company, but I have an aspiration of being a CRO someday. How am I going to get there in the next 3 years? What are you going to do to help me? And I think it's important for women to challenge in the recruiting process, but I think companies need to be ready for it and proactive with it, because the women that are in sales today are very successful and they're very sought after. So if you want to get one of them, you're going to have to pull them out of the company they're in, and they're going to get pickier and pickier. So I think what the smart thing to do for companies today is to look at the women that are on your sales team today, and maybe even on your sales development team, right? The SDRs coming right out of college, and pull them up through the ranks, just like you do the men, right? Pair them up together, give them a buddy that's going to help push them. And if we think about how to feed into the recruiting, I wanted to make a plug for a really great organization called Silicon Valley Academy, SV Academy, that just was founded in San Francisco about 18 months ago by a guy named Raheem Fazell. And his mission is to create SDR-ready candidates. And so he hires people, trains people is the right way to say it, right out of college, gives them 300 hours of training on how to be an SDR. And I'm sure your listeners all have the same problem that I do, which is I can't hire SDRs fast enough. I can't keep them in the seat fast enough. And these are the roles that are qualifying leads, booking appointments for sales reps, outbound prospecting, and so on. And Raheem is has a phenomenal diversity vision, which in his candidate pool, so every month he gets about 3,000 candidates and they picked 30 and they put them through this 300 hours of training. And when those people come out of the training, they are really SDR ready. They know how to use CRM. They have had call coaching and guidance and so on. 60% of his candidates are female. A big percent, like 70%, are first-generation college graduates. And then there's a phenomenal racial minority mix as well. So for anybody that's trying to get better diversity in their companies at all levels, not just female, check out SD Academy. We've hired 5 SDRs in the last 6 months from that program, and they are better than anybody else that we've ever hired right out of college and then tried to teach ourselves. That's a trick for somebody to try to get started early by getting more women in on the ground, and then you mentor them as they come through.
That is a great tip for everybody, and I am definitely going to look them up. I want to take you back both to the research as well as one of the things I was struck by in reading the ebook was you had asked the question, and the question back to you is, what advice would you give to your younger self if you had a do-over and could go back in time that might help you have been more effective more quickly as a leader in women from the women's perspective trying to climb the revenue chain?
I'll answer that personally, and then I can tell you what the research showed because it matched. We asked all of the people we surveyed, what's your advice to your younger self? And it was just an open text field. So we got just great information that's all in the ebook. But for me, it is that I wish that I had learned to listen to my gut instinct earlier. I've always had a very strong gut instinct, but because I worked with a lot of men, and the men that I worked with tended to be very analytical, often engineers, often finance-backed, or even sales leaders who are very revenue and math-focused. If you have a gut feel about something and you're the only woman and you're surrounded by a bunch of analytical men, there's just no way you're going to convince them that your gut feel means something, right? So I would often logic my way out of speaking up about my gut feel, and wouldn't you know, dang it, I was almost always right. Like I'd have an instinct about, no, we shouldn't run XYZ marketing campaign, or no, we shouldn't go to Chicago, we should go to New York instead, or whatever the thing might be. It could be a tactical decision, it could be a very big decision about an ad campaign or something, a lead process we were putting in place. And my gut would be telling me, Tracy, listen, something's wrong, but I wouldn't really know what was wrong, if that makes sense. Often when you have a gut feel, you don't know why you have it. It takes a little while to percolate until you kind of come up with the facts as to why. And as I've gotten older in my career and I have gotten more female allies around me, but also more sensitive men who are willing to listen, I might have a gut feel about something and I'll just say, hey, folks, I don't know why I feel this way, but I think this is absolutely wrong. I don't have data yet to prove it. I'll come back to you in a couple of days. But right now, this is going to be a mistake. And I wish that I had listened to her, in my 20s and in my 30s, because I can point back to some bad mistakes I made because I didn't listen to that gut. So that's mine. And you can tell I'm passionate about it because I can remember some of these mistakes and just thinking, man, I could have avoided that. And I didn't.
I get it. We've all been there, but I think that's also something that I think you're pointing to several things that start with confidence and belief in self. And I think that comes back to mentoring. So I know we are getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to give you the last word here on 2 points. One is, who's the best revenue leader you've ever worked with, and what did you learn? And the second thing is, you mentioned mentoring around women in revenue, and if people want to get involved and connect, how do they and become mentors? How do they do that?
I have worked with some phenomenal revenue leaders. It's really hard to pick just one, but every one of them brought a level of intensity to the business that was just unmatched. The intensity towards that North Star, towards that revenue goal, and they brought everyone along with them. And, of course, there's lots of sales skills that go along with that, but that intensity is the thing that I think that great revenue leaders and only great revenue leaders can bring. When it comes to mentorship and women in revenue, womeninrevenue.org is the URL. Please have your guests go there, take a look. You can get information, a newsletter. We're hosting quarterly events. Our next one is April 25th, and it's a roundtable talk on a variety of different topics. Our first event was all about how to get on a board if you're female. And then we're putting together a mentorship program, which you can sign up to be a mentor or a mentee. Pat, you would be a phenomenal mentor. We're trying to make it really lightweight, keep it virtual. And so let's pretend for a second that you are an expert in messaging and positioning, which I happen to know you are. You could sign up to be a mentor on that topic. And then women that were interested in learning more about that could sign up to talk to you 10 people could sign up to talk to you for an hour and a half over a Zoom meeting and get advice. And so we're trying to keep it lightweight, rapid, outcome-based, and people can sign up today to be a mentor or a mentee. And we need our brothers in this. We can't do it alone. So call to arms for all of your listeners to think about this topic and get involved.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the invitation. Count me in. And as I said, both the research we've done and we continue to find, I continue to observe just in my own professional career that women outperform men. So that's probably the big takeaway from today's show. I'd like to thank our guest, Tracy Eiler, who is on the board of Women in Revenue. You can find out more at womeninrevenue.org. Tracy, thanks so much. Have a fantastic day, and good luck and happy selling.
Thank you.
You've been listening to another episode of Revenue Optimization Radio, brought to you by Altify, right here on the Funnel Radio Network for at-work listeners like you.